Gary, you organise and you lead tours to some of the most powerful ancient sites in the world, but your tours aren't for the typical tourist. How would you say your approach is different from regular tours to ancient sites?
Well, I came into the ancient site tour industry because I was representing various authors like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, and these guys that have been writing on ancient mysteries and the kind of ancient wisdom. So that was where I came into it. So people who would join the tours typically are sort of open-minded, well-read, have realised when we look at the history books that they don't answer all of the questions as much as we've been led to believe when we're at school. There's a lot of big holes, which when you've had these just like natural disasters and so much fighting and things that have gone on over the human civilization, we've of course haven't got this full picture of what's happened in the past. Particularly if you combine that with some kind of natural evolution where we're coming up through the animal kingdom, and that's if we're going to put aside people like Sitchin's work, where there's been some interference in human history. So that was where I came into it from. At the same time I was starting to work on the tours, I was also getting interested in what you could say the spiritual path, meditation, yoga, and Eastern philosophy. And then when I was on site, and it really the big aha moment was when I was inside the Great Pyramid with my friends that lived just near the base of the Sphinx, the Ariane family, and they had started to explain to me that they looked at these ancient sites as using sound resonance, and there was a kind of influence of natural energies, and that's something that we look at on the tours. When I started to use the understandings that I learned in my yoga classes using sound resonance inside the Great Pyramid, all of a sudden I had this huge epiphany, and since then I've had many deep insights in there. It does seem to be somewhere where we can go to perhaps understand about our path in life. Well, certainly one of the best meditation spots on the planet that I've been to, and shared many remarkable experiences. So it's something that goes beyond, you could say, just Gary perhaps fooling himself or being a bit self-deluded. It's this sort of individual experience, but it is something that I've shared with different groups of people at different times. There seems to be something you can replicate using sound. So I've had a growing confidence that our ancestors understood about the effects of sound on their consciousness, a kind of a greater understanding of ancient ritual, moving from the rational mindset that we use on a day-to-day basis to these sort of altered states of consciousness, and just sharing those with people and getting their feedback, and it's kind of self-reinforcing. The more people that I share the experiences with, the more feedback I get, and I understand it at a greater level for the next group.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at the same time, it's really, I think, putting me in touch with myself better, which is hard to prove in an interview like this. But going to Egypt, I feel like I've learned more about myself, and that's been a big surprise. And it's just really, I think it is part of my soul's calling to share these places with people, hold a space, because it's not about what Gary's got to say, it's how powerfully these places can speak to people. So if I can create an opportunity for people to just sit quietly, meditate, or whatever they might want to do, then they can perhaps get the same kind of epiphanies as I've had the pleasure of enjoying.
Yeah, great, because there aren't many tours which approach it from that perspective, or which give people the opportunity to really tune in with I suppose the power and energies of some of these ancient sites. Just talking a bit about the sound resonance. So if we talk about the pyramids of Egypt, would you say that the pyramids then were intentionally constructed to create this sound resonance within it, or was this an accidental outcome of the final product?
Well, the tour that I did earlier in the year was with Christopher Dunn, who many people watching this today might be aware of his work. The Giza Power Plant was one of his books. So from his perspective, they've certainly engineered the sound side of it, perhaps for some different effect of amplifying natural vibrations in the Earth's crust, or if you perhaps on the rare occasion you have a huge earthquake, it could amplify this sound on the rare occasions that kind of thing happened. So that's one side of it. It definitely seems like they've gone to an incredible amount of effort. Anyone that's been inside the Great Pyramid, and you go into the Grand Gallery, which is this kind of 18-foot high chamber that's going up at this very steep incline, and the ceiling steps in. It's got this corbelled ceiling. The engineering involved in that really is mind-boggling when you're inside this huge building, and to stop the whole thing just collapsing on itself. And it's lasted for thousands and thousands of years. So I normally say that the last surviving great wonder on the planet, if you go there with any kind of spiritual eye or eyes and give yourself an opportunity to see what you feel inside, very rarely would you be disappointed. And using the sound, which you can certainly do, it does seem like the King's Chamber in particular, the engineering there is designed to enhance sound frequency, so it's incredibly sensitive to sound. So if I say hello, you get an echo like hello, 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 gradually getting quieter and quieter. And what I've been looking at is also the kind of subaudible sound frequencies. And at lower frequencies, you can feel the sound with the body's sense of touch, as I mentioned in my article on your site recently. And these kind of low frequencies do seem to be very effective on the emotional healing side of things. There's similar frequencies to used for gong baths. And so these low frequencies can get in kind of into the body and resonate these kind of, I would say, deep-seated emotional traumas, because that seems to have been my path and how I've come to understand these things. And it sort of excites it and can lighten you, because at the end of coming out of the Great Pyramid and after being at a gong bath, you feel what you can only describe as this kind of lightness to you. And it's really quite a special feeling. And the reason I'm really keen about sound healing is because this is something that many people in the West can find locally to them now. So it's an experiential effect. So anyone listening here can look up these things on Google, and if you're interested, go along and try it and see how you feel.
Interesting. And are there other ancient sites as well that have this same characteristic?
Yes, and it's becoming more and more obvious just how many. One of the articles that's been at the top of your reading list has been this the acoustic effects at Stonehenge.
Yes.
The last week. And so in that article they said, well, there's these blue stones, and it looks like if you knock them with perhaps another stone or a kind of makeshift hammer, that you're going to get this kind of sound frequency. Well, if they were doing the same thing at Stonehenge as which we're still doing in Egypt, and that is if you put a group of people in the middle of Stonehenge and you harmonise your sound, that those stones, the stones around you, will start to vibrate in sympathy. So you don't necessarily need to be knocking it. I mean, it could have been somebody coming along later on that had forgotten the original purpose, or multi-purposes. With some of the sound healing things you can do now, you can bang it or vibrate in sympathy. But for the kind of altered states of consciousness, similar, you could say, to perhaps something like ayahuasca, then the chanting as a group is a very, very powerful method without having to ingest something.
So you've also talked about many of these ancient sites, including the pyramids, being like power centers or power energy centers. What kind of energy are we talking about here? Is that related to the healing and the vibration, or is that something different?
Well, I mean, one of the mistakes I think I've seen some people trying to make is that we're going to sort of put a blanket blanket explanation for a lot of ancient sites across a broad spectrum of them. Um, from my experience, I think there was quite a few different things going on. So where have I focused my attention? And when you say, were there other sites connected to sound? Well, Peru, I've seen a similar site, Marais, and likewise down by Lake Titicaca is a doorway of Maramuru, and that is one of the most powerful places that I've ever just felt this kind of natural energy in the landscape. In a similar way to the island of Philae, the temple of Isis, which admittedly has been moved, but in the inner sanctum in the temple is this stone, and I've felt literally plugged into the universe when I've put my hands onto it. And I've given people the opportunity on tour to go into that room, because it's not always necessarily easy. And without me saying about my experience, because I try not to kind of lead the witness, because I like people to explain things in their own terms. But I've had people coming out saying that they felt plugged into the universe in exactly the same way I did, without me ever telling them what I've experienced. And then one lady from Australia said she returned home, and after that experience, she just felt much more connected to the world at large. She had a kind of different relationship, I think, with her pet, she was saying, and just a general awareness of the kind of interactions with people. So it can increase our sensitivity to some of these things. And generally the people that come on these tours that kind of have some kind of a regular practice, self-development, are already starting to make themselves kind of more aware or more sensitive. And so I would say that these ancient sites are capable of enhancing that part of their journey. It might be like me, that they're trying to find something in their heart, contribution to make towards other people moving forwards and growing in a similar way. And I think I can speak from experience and say that by increasing our sensitivity and awareness of others and the world at large, that our life and contribution comes into perspective a bit. One of the things that I've just come back from California, and I'm just in the middle of pitching a TV show, which I'm tentatively calling Places of Power. And so we will go out into the landscape, because there are natural places where we feel kind of more alive, energized. How we feel next to a waterfall by the ocean is very different to how we feel in a city. And I think there's something that I could contribute to people's awareness, and just sort of bringing that to the public's attention. And there are some electronic tools where we can start to measure some of these kind of finer forces which our ancestors seem to be familiar with, and were perhaps enhancing. When we say what were they doing with the sites, well, enhancing some of these natural energies in the planet, or perhaps sort of condensing them and building them up, as there seems to be some kind of batteries, like perhaps something Silbury Hill near in Stonehenge kind of landscape. And so that's one of my next projects. So if there's anyone in Hollywood, I will be there at some point early next year. I'm looking for meetings.
Well, there is a theory out there about these ley lines, these energy lines which seem to crisscross at various points on the Earth. And I know that there's been talk about the site Glastonbury Tor in England, where this is meant to be quite a powerful site energetically, and is supposedly an area where all these energy lines converge into one place. And one theory that's out there is that a lot of these powerful ancient sites, like the pyramids and Stonehenge, have been placed in that exact location because of the natural energies of the Earth, which are particularly powerful in that spot. Would you say that could be the case, or do you believe that rather than tapping into the natural energies, they've actually constructed the pyramids, for example, to create or harness that energy?
I'm definitely comfortable with the possibility that they had an awareness, perhaps even just a kind of different way of looking at the world, where they knew that there was these natural kind of outpourings of energy. The work of John Burke has inspired many of us, and he was looking at the kind of different geology that would allow this kind of energy to come up to the surface. So that's kind of where I'm at. They definitely had an awareness, and when you look at the Giza Plateau, that was not that place on the planet is very, very, very special. Those pyramids are not there by any accident. I think whoever the master builders were back in the day, they filtered down to Egypt to build along the Nile because they were fully aware that it was one of the most powerful places for what they wanted to do on the planet. I don't think it's come out of the people being there and just happening to use that environment. I think they realised what they had at their disposal there. And the same for Stonehenge, and both of them are very similar, whereas the Giza Plateau is this limestone plateau, and at some point, well, we know that there was running water coming up from the Nile when it used to flood, and Stonehenge is chalk, so very similar kind of geology with a river not too far away and a lot of rainfall. So in both of these environments, you would have probably been generating some kind of faint electrical charge through this process, and that could well be part of this system that they were utilising.
Mm-hmm. Also, it was said that in many of these places they conducted like ancient rituals and ceremonies. What do you know about those ancient rituals, and do you think there are any of these ceremonies that can be conducted today that would have the same effect?
In the short answer, yes, I do believe even now that some of these ancient sites we can tap in to at least some of the power. And I speak about that from personal experience because I've had some life-changing experiences and shared those with many other people. So I have a confidence to say that. I mean, we unless we can go back in time and say, okay, well, it's the same now as it was then, I certainly wouldn't go that far. But I mean, the kind of experience I've had, for example, in the Great Pyramid, was it gave me a perspective on not only my spiritual journey, where I've my kind of spiritual progress, but also humanity's, where our place in the grand scheme of things. And it kind of showed me that we are in this adolescent stage, because I mean we know how many potential other planets there are out there. We know we're kind of getting an idea of how big the universe is, and we know that we have only just got to our moon. There is so many billions and billions of planets and stars, trillions of stars out there for us to explore. If any civilization ever managed to explore that to that level, I mean, what kind of perspective does that put our little civilization in that's just been to the moon? So we really need to understand that we are like children here, and we need to be careful about the things like the nuclear technologies and the kind of long-term impacts that we can have on the planet, because we haven't got the long-term foresight. And also our governments are not set up for long-term planning a lot of the time with these 4-year time scales. So my side of it is to encourage people to visit the ancient sites. I'm interested in taking people to where I feel the most power, where I can meditate and tap into what I would call the kind of perennial wisdom. The techniques like yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, acupuncture, these are timeless, you could say, healing modalities, in the same way that the sound techniques, vibration and chanting, doesn't matter at what point in time we've incarnated on this planet, those techniques are capable of helping us at any point. And I mean, you could probably argue with the modern day stresses and how little time we have to look after ourselves these days on a sort of emotional level.
Definitely.
Meditation and things are needed more than ever.
Yes, exactly. So if someone was interested in going on one of these tours to really tap into that, I guess you could say mystical or spiritual side of an ancient site, how could they do that? When is the next tour, and where, and how can they go?
Well, my first tip for anybody at any point is that I've coined something which I'm going to call energetic callings. I think many of us know in our hearts where we've been interested to, perhaps since a young age, or where we feel called to. We don't know why, but we want to visit somewhere. And from my experience, if you're feeling that in your heart, or you kind of had an intuition about where you need to go, then there's probably something waiting there. And you probably won't be disappointed, particularly when you're talking about these kind of really energetic places. It's like the Great Pyramid is sending out some kind of a homing signal around the planet. When I've booked hundreds of people into these Egypt tours now and heard many of their stories, I just had to go to Egypt, people say. Been fascinated with it for as long as I can remember. I knew I had to go there one day. And then when they get there, they suddenly have this kind of big realization. So it's difficult to rationalize what's going on, but sometimes we can't always get to the answer intellectually. We need to listen to our intuition or just that inner knowing. And in terms of joining me, I'm going to be back in Egypt at the end of March. Got a fantastic tour planned with various other authors. So I've got quite a few tours running next year. We've got an Ireland and England tour. We might go to Scotland, looking at doing Malta, and then I'll be in Peru with Brian Forster and Yusuf Awan and Stephen Meller in September. And those are all listed on my infinite-connections.co.uk website. I'm on Twitter, connections_PR, and I've got a good Facebook group if people want to join, where we have some conversations on some of these matters, and that's Infinite Connections. You're always happy to answer any questions that people, or hear about people's experiences, because we're at the point where it's this kind of collaborative effort, like what you're doing, where we're trying to help each other along, all contributing to the bigger picture.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Gary, for your time and for sharing a different perspective about the pyramids, and hopefully more people will take up the opportunity to experience that side of these amazing sites.
Definitely, and thank you for your time, and thanks for listening, everyone.